appreciate everybody showing up this morning. Glad to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? I usually don't use microphones. Usually I'm the guy that's just shouting out loud, so I want to make sure I'm not shouting into this too as well. So I tend to kind of have a booming voice if I'm not concentrating. So, all right. Well, glad to be here. This is always exciting for me because as I get into the details of who I am and our company, I want to explain that I travel nationally. I provide business continuity planning services all across the country at both the government level, at the university level, at the private sector level, small businesses, large businesses, everything in between. But to be here in Sarasota County, in my home area, I'm from Venice, is particularly special. Okay, so this is kind of my stomping ground. So I'm really excited to be here and put on a presentation for you today. What I'd like to do first is give you a little bit of background about who I am and our company. So you've got a little bit of an overview. I'm going to keep it to one slide, obviously, because I want to get into the meat and potatoes of what this plan is, what it's all about. So a little bit about me. Again, Chad Bowers, I work for BOLDplanning Solutions. Our company is actually based and headquartered out of Nashville, Tennessee. So if you hear a little bit of a twang in my voice, I did grow up a little bit in Nashville. It does kind of hang around. So I've got a little bit of a country accent still left. We specialize in providing continuity planning services and business continuity services, again, to the private sector, to universities, and the government sector. I've got about 11 years of experience in continuity planning. It's really what I do day in and day out, whether I'm here, whether I'm in New York, California, Chicago, whatever it is. Typically, I'm in front of clients developing their continuity plans and walking them through the process. So this is really from our company's structure, our bread and butter. Okay? Now, I'm a lead project manager for multiple projects, but the ones that I wanted to mention today is the Denver International Airport, Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, you might have heard of that one, and then also the California Superior Courts. Each of these projects very interesting. From an airport standpoint, a lot of times, when you start the project, you're like, okay, well, how can you do a backup plan for an airport? You can't really move the runway, all right? But it's bigger than that. When you look at airport operations, airports are made up of, they're almost like little cities in themselves. They have their own departments, their financial institutions, their security areas, their IT areas. All of these are standalone entities that have to protect their operations because if they start to fail, the whole airport starts to fail. All right, it's a trickle effect. So Denver International Airport's a customer, always an interesting project for us because the detail and the scale and the magnitude. Again, Notre Dame and California Superior Courts, I manage their projects as well. Luckily enough, I get out to California about once a month, maybe once every 2 months, to work with airport systems and walk them through the process. So we provide services to over 3,000 clients, all right? Again, all types, all sizes. So enough about me. Let's get into the details. What I chose to do today is I wanted to break this up into 3 components, all right? I want to talk about the plan, all right? What is this thing? When you talk about a business continuity plan, it comes with a lot of definitions. It comes with a lot of fancy words like business impact analysis and risk assessment. And, there's a lot of terminology that's in there. I want to clarify what these things really are. When you cut all the fancy words out of it, what is it we're really trying to put together in this plan and how does it fit together? So I want to talk about the plan from A to Z. I also want to talk about the process. All right, so when you get into this, once you understand this plan and what the components are, what is the process that you're putting together? What are some of the hurdles you're going to face? What's going to be some of the pushback that you get from people inside your agency or outside your agency? And then the realities, okay? Again, we've done this all across the country for multiple organizations. We know the reality of what people bring to the table and what their expectations are. So I want to make sure I share some of those experiences with you. Okay, so those are the main components: BCP, the keys to success, and the realities, and then questions. If at any point today you have a question, then feel free to stop me. I like to run a real informal discussion, so if something perks your interest, let me know, but I will reserve a few minutes afterwards for questions and answers. Okay, so BCP. It's the abbreviated term for business continuity planning. Simply put, this is a strategy of how your business is planning to continue to do business. All right? I know it seems elementary, but that's all this is about. How you bounce back. All right? Bad stuff happens. We all have our comfort zones. Okay? So when you go to work every morning, you You show up with your coffee. You're used to having your office space. You're used to having your desk, your computers, your connectivity. You're used to having your staff and your leadership there. Those are our comfort zones. BCP is all about removing either single parts or multiple parts of that comfort zone. What happens when we take your facility out of the equation? Can you operate? What happens when we take your staff out of the equation, or a portion of your staff? Can you operate? What happens when we take your IT out of the equation? If your email is not working, if your servers aren't working, can you still operate? So it's a backup. So what you talk about is, when you get into your BCP, think of it as your extra set of car keys. All right. I always like to bring analogies into this. There's those people that they have the extra set of car keys in the magnet underneath the car. Okay, why? Because when you lock your keys in the car, or you drop them in the ocean, or you lose them, it's always nice to have that backup set you can go to, pull them out, get back in your car, and continue on your day. Continue to operate from a lifestyle issue. Okay. Same thing. It's a backup plan. Otherwise, if you don't have those backup keys, what are you going to do? You're going to be the guy that sits on the side of the interstate or sits in the Walmart parking lot and gets mad at yourself because you didn't do some proactive planning ahead of time. Now, the BCP should clearly define the steps that an organization could take or should take if we have a disruption. Now, I'm going to use the word disruption a lot today, okay? Because as we get into this, your continuity plans are definitely about disasters and can be used for disasters, but I also want to knock you down a couple notches and say, look, it doesn't have to be a hurricane that causes you to activate your continuity plan. It could be something very small and minute that you're not, that you don't see coming. All right, but you're going to go through the same type of discussions. All right. Now, as you start to develop your BCP, there's several questions that you should start with, just the preliminary things. What type of events could cause a disruption? Okay. Everybody in here has a different setup. You all represent different organizations, different businesses, all right? You all have different things that are in the back of your mind about, if we were to have an event, what would it be, all right? It could be the geography of where your office is placed, okay, if you're close to the coast or not close to the coast, in a floodplain, not in a floodplain. You could have IT back, let's say a central part of your operations is IT. In the back of your mind, you're going to be thinking about, hey, my servers, as Mark was talking about, he stayed awake at night, thinking if the server goes down, that's a huge issue. So as you get started, you got to think about what type of events could cause a disruption. If it was facility-based, where could we go or where would we go? Do we have alternate facilities identified? How would we communicate the message? This is a big one. Director McCrane talked about it. Communication under times of duress is very difficult. Okay, we'll talk about that. And then most importantly, what are the operational goals of our organization, our business processes, the things that we do, all right? What goes into that? What are the things that we do? Which ones are most important? And what items would we need to do this, all right? So that's some basic discussion about, as you get started, things you need to consider. Now, business continuity plans, they usually focus on three main things: people, places, and things, all right? The people in your organization, both internal and external, all right, that play a part. If you have a continuity event, you're going to have both your team responding to this, but you're also going to have external resources, IT providers, third-party vendors, anybody that comes to your aid. So you're going to have people and then also places. The places where you go to work versus the places you could go to work and the things that you're going to need, all right? So the things that you need and the things you do. Now, as you start to develop the BCP, so you think about this, from a real world perspective. We're going to spend time putting this together, but really, what am I going to get out of it? Well, number one, you're going to get peace of mind. You're going to get some direction that if we have an event, how is it going to roll out, who's going to do what? But it's also going to help you focus on what are the impacts to our finances, revenues, and our profit losses. If we stop doing certain things within our business and our operation, what's the ramifications, okay? It also is going to help you understand and clarify legal liability. Are there certain things that if we stop doing, it opens up a can of worms from a legal issue or a legal standpoint? And then it's also going to let you understand what are the tolerable levels of service outages. If we do start to stumble, if we have a disruption, what are the levels that we can let certain things go down before we start to lose customer support, customer satisfaction, or money, okay? So, to talk about that, all businesses should definitely develop some form of a BCP at some level. But larger organizations also need to understand that if you're a large group, if you've got a lot of employees and you're multifaceted across multiple departments, you actually need to look at developing what I call mini BCPs for each department, okay? So, in short, this is all strategic pre-planning. It's all developed under normal conditions. This is how you look at your operations from a business. The thing that you want to focus on, though, is you want to do this under normal conditions, while you're comfortable, while the lights are on, while the facility's okay. This is what allows you to go through the thought process clearly. If you wait till after the event, you're going to be behind the curveball, okay? So requirements. I always like to point this out, especially on the government side. When you get into the requirements, there's a lot of different pressure points about why we do continuity planning, why we get into this. At the federal level, we have what's called FCD 1 and 2, all right? So at the government level, it's not a choice for them. If they're a federal agency or an executive level agency, FCD 1 and 2 says, thou shalt have a continuity plan at all times. You've got to have a continuity program. There's also local guidance at CGC 1 and 2 that says, if you're a city or a county or a state agency, if you put together a continuity plan, here's how it should look, this is what it should look like, and the flavor of terminology, okay? Now, 80% of states right now, the good news is they require continuity plans in place for their state level agencies. So there's governor's executive orders, again, that say thou shalt do who. Now at the local level, let's talk about private sector businesses. What are the pressure points for you? For example, one of you, for any of you that might be financial related, if you're a financial institution, you have to adhere to the FFIEC, okay? This is the code that basically, there's a lot of different codes that go into this, but one of them is, hey, if you're a bank, you need to have a continuity plan, because we're going to look at that, and that's what we're going to base your score on for when you go through your FDIC insurance, okay? We won't get into all the details about that, but if you're a bank, you have to do it because these two regulators say so, all right, if you want to be FDIC insured. Now, the third one here, a lot of times what we're starting to see now more and more proactively based on some of the disasters is the requirements to do a continuity plan actually are coming from some of your business partners at this point. An example that I've got is one of our customers, Pacific Cast Technologies, which is out of Oregon. They sought us out, they came to us because they said, hey, we make titanium parts for Boeing, all right? Boeing last year said, anybody that provides us with a service or a supplier, you have to have a continuity plan in place, and we will audit you every year to make sure it's there. They came to us and said, we're not really sure what this is all about. We don't want to lose our business with Boeing, but this is an example of there's a lot more business partners that are starting to require this. They've made the connection that if we're going to operate, we may be okay, but as we've said previously, there could be providers and suppliers that if they're not okay, that can just as severely disrupt your operations and your ability to continue, okay? And then lastly, I'll talk about PS Prep, just because this is a program run by FEMA. It's a private sector initiative. Basically, what FEMA, as Director McCrane mentioned, Craig Fugate that was here as the state director in Florida, he's moved on to run FEMA at this point. Very proactive, very good leadership. They've put together this program that says, look, we need to make sure the private sector can continue to operate. They're establishing criteria, and they've set up an accreditation program. So as you put your business continuity plan together, if you want to be involved in the PS Prep initiative, you can actually send them your continuity plan. They will review it, give you feedback, and constructive criticism about where you are and kind of where you're going. So there's definitely an intergovernmental and private sector relationship that's being formed at the continuity level. Okay, so the major sections of your BCP, I like to call this the Big Six, okay? These are the major components. Now there's a lot of different pieces that flow off of this, but these are the ones that we always want to stay focused on from a planning aspect. As you go through, you're going to develop contacts. Who are the people internal and external? And develop teams. If we have a disruption, who's doing what? Let's try and sort out some of these responsibilities. Let's divvy it out. You develop an orders of succession, okay? This is all about who comes next, all right? This is let's say that I'm the CEO or the director of finance, and I can't serve in my capacity. Who steps in for me? And who steps in after them? And who steps in after them? Have you identified the flow chart, okay? Primary and alternate facilities, again, where you work versus where you could go to work. Your essential business functions, that fancy word that stands for what we do, our business operations. the vital records and resources, the things you use to do your functions, the tools, the amenities, and then again, communication. So let's start with the first one. I've got a couple of slides for each of these sections. VCP contacts and teams, all right? First thing you got to do is you start developing a list of both internal and external people, all right? This can be, whether it's facility managers, if you lease space, if you rent space, if it's not your building. You want to know facility managers and property management points of contact, not just their work number, but also their home number, their cell number, okay? Things happen during business hours, but also non-business hours. You want to sort out who are your IT providers, okay? If it's in an Exio, okay? If it's a group like that handles your IT sourcing, make sure you know who these people are and how to get a hold of them. And then also your vendors and suppliers, anybody that factors into your overall operations. If you're used to having this truck show up every day at 8 o'clock with certain supplies or certain resources or tools or amenities, you need to make sure that you know who they are, and also you need to check with them to make sure that they have a continuity plan in place as well. All right? Now, as you put these people together, you're going to develop some teams. Some example teams that I always talk about. Number one is you want an executive team. You want to make sure that there's some high-level leadership that participates in this. Okay? You want to make sure that the people at the top, even though they might not be directly involved in the entire planning process, that they have oversight, they have understanding, and most importantly, support. Okay? So get your executive team involved. You can put together a relocation team. Again, if we do have to move, where are we moving to? What are we going to need? And who's bringing what? Can we sort out and start to decide who's going to amass what? There's a lot of different companies that you can utilize as well in this area. If you do have to move, you've got disaster recovery companies that can come in and set up virtual offices. They can coordinate the relocation. So if you're going to do it internally, you want to identify who's doing it. If you do it externally, you go ahead and make those relationships with those companies. And then finally, the planning team. All right, as you begin this plan, somebody's got to be responsible for it. There's got to be a group that's involved that makes sure that it starts and then it also continues, that there's a revision process. Okay, so plan maintenance. Again, orders of succession. As you get into this, identify key positions in your organization. Who's in charge and then who comes next. List specific individuals or titles that are authorized to take over. And then also, make sure you identify any specialized capabilities people may have, okay? If I'm the one person in the office that knows how to run the XYZ system, and I'm the only person, you better start doing some cross-training, because if something happens to me, if I'm in a car wreck, again, it's not a disaster, it's a disruption. Who can step in and take over my job? Or if we have a hurricane and I can't come into the office for a week or two because maybe somebody in my family was impacted or I lost my house, who can step in and take over my job? Make sure that you identify who are the doers in your organization, and have you identified backup roles. This closely matches pandemic flu planning. I've got one slide later on that talks about that, but when you get into pandemic flu planning, I know that this is not a high priority right now to you. We went through and we saw the news coverage over the last few years. Trust me, it will creep back up. It will become an issue again. There's already murmurs about it, okay? Now, essential business functions. This is where you basically go in and these are individual sound bites or statements. These are the things that you do. Every business operates differently. They have a different core at what they're directing, okay? What you do is your functions. What you need to do is list these out and describe them under normal operating conditions. So if you start to put these functions together, you'd say, well, today we're the ability to answer a phone and do customer service calls, the ability to do this, you're going to list out all the normal things that are occurring right now under normal conditions. Now, as you go through, you conduct these for a variety of reasons, all right? Some of these functions, you do it because you have to, all right? You have to do it because of compliancy, say. If there's any laws, ordinance, or statutes that say, hey, as this business, you have to get this done on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, whatever it is. There's also financial drivers. Well, we do this because it brings in the most money, period, okay? We're a business. So you gotta look at what are the things that push you to do this? Financial reasons, and then also customer care and goodwill. We do it because if we stop doing it, the customers don't like our processes. The customers are feeling alienated, all right? So you have to identify what are all the things that make up our business operations and why are we doing these things? When you put them together though, you want to make sure that finally you prioritize them. If you had to pick and choose which ones to do or not do, you need to understand what they are and what priority, all right? If half the staff shows up, or doesn't show up because of a hurricane event, what functions do you have to put on hold? What functions do you have to postpone so you can catch your breath again? If you can't get all the work done, you need to understand what's most important and why. Okay? Why you're doing it in the first place. Think of it like an engine. Again, another one of my analogies. Whether you're, again, a private sector company, a large organization, or even if you're like a city or county government, think of it like an engine. All the players, you have an engine that runs smoothly on any given day, all right? So the sun's out today, it's Friday, everything's running well. But what happens if one of your departments or one of the parts of your engine starts to fail? It has an overall effect on the rest of the engine, okay? So as you go through and you develop your essential business functions, the things you do, what you want to think about in the back of your mind is, what are the functions that if we stop doing are going to have large failures to the engine versus what are the small failures, okay? Kind of sort those things out and understand. So one department also can relate to another department if they start to fail. If finance starts to fail, that can have an overall effect, not just on their department, but the other parts of the engine as well. So think of it from a business, from an engine impact. Now, as you get in, you want to make sure you identify any interdependencies with these functions, both from a vital records and database standpoint. So here's all the things that we do. Now let's correlate what we need to do, what databases, what systems. Also correlate what departments or partnerships, all right? We were talking earlier about your suppliers and your vendors. Who is it you rely upon to get some of these functions done? So again, if they're having a bad day, if they're having a disruption or an outage, even though your facility is fine, your staff is fine, your IT is fine, some of the services they provide can make you start to falter or fail. So be aware of your reliance on external sources and identify alternate options. A lot of people, when it comes to suppliers, you need to think about who that next competitor is, all right? It's a dog-eat-dog world. That's the way it is, all right? If you've got a certain supplier you've been doing work with them for 10 years, that's great. But if you don't have a backup for them, that's a chink in your armor, okay? You need to think about if they start to fail, whether it's a disaster-related event, whether it's maybe a financial or operating-related event, who's the next backup? How can I replace their supply function, okay? So it's the centerpiece of the BCP, and it's what your organization is trying to protect. Essential business functions. So again, just to wrap this up, why? This right here is the centerpiece of your operations. You do the things that you do for a reason. Again, financial related, compliance related, whatever it is. So if you lose your facility, this is still what you're trying to get done. If the building burned down, you got to get this going again. Okay, that's your centerpiece. Half my staff can't get in. I'm still trying to get my functions done. Or if I lose my IT connectivity, my servers, my emails, some way, somehow, you're still trying to get your functions done. So the definition is, continuing to operate is basically essential functions, getting them done. All right? If you are completing your functions, you're continuing to operate. Business continuity. Okay? Business impact analysis. Really, this fancy word for how you correlate the things that we do and then the impacts that we suffer from not doing it. Okay? So as you start to look at this, it's going to correlate the functions of your organization and then give you an understanding of the tolerable levels of outages that we explained, the time frames that are allowable, and different recovery options. So it's a cause and effect. Again, a lot of things might be financial related, loss of customer faith, or potential legal issues. But you start to think about it, if we can't do this, what's the ramifications? What's the next step? It leads to a risk assessment, which also gives you proactive measures to mitigate these consequences. All right, this is what management's going to be looking for. All right, this is where they get to make the decisions about, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? Let's talk about, let's say you have a factory that makes widgets. All right, the factory, it pushes out 5,000 widgets a day, and they cost $1 each or whatever it is. You now have a quantifiable understanding of how much that factory is worth on a day-to-day standard. Well, you got to take a step back, and when you do a risk assessment, say, well, if we were going to lose this factory, what would be some of the causes? One might be, well, if we lose power, the factory can't operate, right? If we have a building fire, the factory can't operate. All these different things that could take out the widget factory. Now, the cause and effect is, you get to look at the risk assessment and say, well, if we lose our power, we can do something proactive like let's buy a backup generator. It might cost us $5 grand, but in the end, it could also, for one day outage, save us 10 grand. So you can start to quantify what are the things that you do, and what are the different options based on a risk assessment. Also, supply disruptions, alternative suppliers. So you got to go through and look at what are the things that can disrupt us and how can we work around it. Now, vital records and resources, these are the items that you use to do your job, all right? All of your departments, all of your organizations, they use specialized tools, software, systems. That's the way it is nowadays. You need to identify, first off, what these things are. When you show up at, on a Monday morning with your coffee in hand and you're ready to get to work, what are the tools and amenities on your computer that allow you to do your job? And if you didn't have them at your convenience, could you still effectively operate? All right? So you need to identify what are the most important systems and databases that you use. Again, some examples, database software systems. They could also be manuals or documents or specialized tools or equipment. All right? If you don't have these at your convenience, can you still get your job done? They're also not always electronic. Talking about our court system work that we do, one of the things they always bring up is they say, hey, the judge has this special gold seal. Without that stamp or without that hard ticket item, we can't do our job, our court operations. He can't make the final verdict, et cetera, et cetera. So an example they always bring up is, if we lose that, we're in a lot of trouble, all right? So what we tell them is, why don't you go ahead and order a new one? Let's go ahead and have a backup, put it in the safe, in the judge's office, wherever it is. So if a disgruntled employee, somebody mentioned that earlier, disgruntled employee, it's not a disruption. They go in and they say, okay, you're going to let me go, I got my pink slip, well, I'm going to take this, put it in their pocket and walk out the door. Those are different ways that, things that are not disasters can impact your ability to operate. So continuing to operate, understanding what they are. Now, they should also relate directly back to your essential business functions. For each vital record, again, you just have to ask the qualifying questions about, number one, is it backed up? And if so, by whom and where? And how do we get in contact with them quickly? Okay? So as you put this together, if you find out that something's not up and running properly, the sooner you pick up the phone and call them and make them aware of it, the sooner they get up and running, the sooner you can get back to the functions that are tied to it. So it's like you're basically putting the footsteps on a map. And then the biggie is, this is always fun, do not make the mistake of assuming it's being backed up. I can't tell you how many times we'll go in and somebody says, oh yeah, we use the such and such system, and it's backed up and everything else. And I look back at the back room and the IT guy's like, I've never heard of this. I don't know what they're talking about. So don't assume. It does happen, okay? If documented correctly, as a wrap up to these two sections, your essential business functions, when you print your document, when you put this together, if you've done it in the right flavor, your essential functions and your description of vital records should be a great training tool for new hired personnel. They should basically explain, hey, welcome to the club. This is what we do, this is why it's important, and this is the tools we use to do it. It correlates all of it together. So if you're thinking about how to write this or the flavor, that's what it should sound like, all right? Alternate facilities. So these are pre-identified locations where you could relocate potentially if you had to move. If you lose your building, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a fire, whatever it is, when identifying it, obviously think about space allocation. And also think about specialized requirements. Going back to the courts again, we can't just move them into a gymnasium. They have to have specialized rooms for sequestered juries. The juries have to be able to go to private areas to convene. The judge has to have secure judge chambers. So these are things that they look at. You also need to look at, if you handle financial related matters, if you handle money or credit cards or anything like that, you got to put in certain security precautions. Okay, you can't just set up shop in here and then put money out on the table. You got to think about, do we need a vault, a safe? What are the things that factor into our operations as a whole? In a lot of cases, especially on the government side, a lot of organizations can't identify a specific location. That's okay, all right? As a starter kit, when you get started, put it down as a to be determined. I'm not sure where we're going to go, but let's start to talk about what we're going to need and in what quantities, all right? So take the whole situation of a specific facility out of the equation if you can, and think about if we had to move into a room with 4 walls and lights, what do we need immediately to get back up in operation if we lost our facility? That's going to be your starter kit. You need to understand that because that's the first thing when you have an event that you're going to be asked for. Your executive level is going to say, well, what do we need? All right, so start to sort out what it is that you need and then the priorities. And then also coordinate with your neighbors, all right? Make sure that, if you've got good relationships with people here in Sarasota or in the surrounding area, maybe work out memorandums of understanding saying, hey, if we lose our facility, will you make room for us for 30 days and vice versa? We'll make room for your office for 30 days. Work out agreements because things like that can really save you having that sorted out ahead of time. And so, relocation, work this out with your organizations in and around your area. Okay, so communication. This is one of my favorite ones. Identify how you would communicate during times of this disruption, all right? If you had to contact your personnel, how would you go about it, all right? Do you have call trees in place? Do you have 800 phone numbers? Do you have a website where you post information? Do you have, what's called reverse 911, where you can record a message, push a button, and it zaps out hundreds of phone calls to your people saying, here's what's happened, here's what to do. This is so important because it's the number one thing you've got to do out of the gate, okay? Something happens, an event occurs. First thing you have to do is pull your people together and explain to them what's happened, what to do, what not to do, when to do it, et cetera, okay? So it's very important. For whatever reason, it's scientific fact, rumors spread faster than the truth, all right? So when you come down to continuity events, make sure you get ahead of the communication trail, because if you don't send the message, if you're not relaying information, you're going to start to hear the rumor mill train and you're not going to be able to keep up with it. So make sure once you develop a process of how we communicate, that you design a process to train on it, and also make sure that your people know about it. Make it a two-way street. What this really means is, if I'm employee number 152 on the food chain, if I don't get a phone call after what I perceive as an event, I need to know who to contact for information. I need to know what the next rung up on the ladder is. So I'm expecting the phone call, but if it doesn't come to me, where do I go back to for recourse? Where do I get my information from? So if you have 800 numbers, hotline numbers, make sure your employees know it. Can't tell you how many times we'll walk into a training and say, okay, do we have a hotline number? Everybody puts their hand up, oh yeah, we got it. What is it? That's realistically what we hear, okay? So make sure if you do have some of these things in place, you train on it. Now, let's take a quick quiz. What do you think, from a percentage standpoint, what do you think the chances are that something is going to happen, a disruption or an event, during business hours versus non-business hours? Any guesses?
80%.
80%, okay? So there's an 80% chance that something's going to happen while we're at work versus when we're not at work.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Flip it.
Yeah.
I think you got the right answer, but exactly, okay? Here's the way we look at it. I'll give you the first answer. How many hours in a day? 24, okay? How often do we go to work? I know it feels like 16 to 18, 24. Okay. Listen, we'll break this down. If you're a typical, if you work traditional hours, which is, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, so you got 24 hours in a day, your workers spend about 8 hours of that workday face-to-face, okay? There's a lot more time that they're away from the office, all right? So right now, we're at a 33rd and a third, 33.3. Now, you also got to factor in weekends, all right? So with that Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 option, when you put in weekends, that Saturday and Sunday that we love, now you're whittling that time at the office down to 25 to 28%, okay? Now, when you put in holidays and vacation time, you're down to 20%. And I know you're looking at this going, I'm at work way more than 20%. That's the way I see it. I still don't understand this, so if you don't know what it is. But as you go through, what you got to think about is, okay, the reality is, based on the work cycle and an 8-hour workday, we're actually only at work 20% of our life, okay? Which means there's 80% of the time that we're not at work. And that just goes back to talk about why alert notification and communication with your staff during non-business hours is so critical, all right? So for those of you that might say, hey, I've got 150 people that work in my company, can you pull those people together on a Saturday afternoon if need be during an event or a disruption? Can you find them, all right? When they're out at the football fields playing with the kids, or they're at the beach or a picnic or whatever it is, can you find them, or can you communicate with them to tell them what has happened, when to do what, et cetera, okay? So again, very high likelihood that something could happen during non-hours. Now, with any plan, any kind of process, you got to put in a test, training, and exercise methodology, all right? You've built this great document, you've got it, it's printed, but do people know what's in it? So just make sure it's one of the most important processes in your plan that when you feel like you've gotten to that point where it's polished and ready to go, you got to make sure everybody understands what's in it. It helps identify gaps in your plan, so if you exercise on it, you can find critical points of improvement, okay? Train the staff on what's in it. I always like to talk about, exercises. Go through the motions, role play. If something were to happen, what decisions would we make? Are they the right decisions? Does it make sense to everybody that's sitting around the table? One of the inexpensive alternatives I like to mention is, one day, of course, with the executive level approval or the boss's approval, tape off an important room, okay? Take a 50-cent piece of tape, put it across the doorway, and say, inaccessible for 1 hour, all right? Watch what people do. Can they continue to operate? Are there alternatives? Are there workarounds for whatever's in that room? Because if you see people kind of fixated on something saying, I just need that right there, no, go get the backup for it. Where's the backup? What's the process for it? If they can't use that as a workaround, or if they don't have an alternative, that should be some red flags about there's things that we have in our possession that are not backed up properly, or that we don't have a process in place for. And then finally, learn from your exercises. They're used to update your plan. Family disaster planning. This is a part of your plan in a sense. Actually, not in a sense, in reality. What this is designed to do is, first off, you need to encourage your employees to prepare, all right? Because I'll skip down here. Fact, if your workers are not comfortable, if their families are not okay, if they're not prepared, they won't be showing up for work, I can guarantee you, okay? If little Johnny and little Susie are injured, or if they're impacted or scared, your worker will not be there Monday morning come 8 a.m. They're going to be at home with their family. So family disaster planning, very important because they won't show up. Educate them on the basics, all right? Employees should always have some level of preparedness developed. And again, Director McCray mentioned this. FloridaDisaster.org. Very proud of the system. Why? We built it. We developed the family disaster planning system 5 years ago for Governor Bush that basically walks you through the get a plan process. All right? As we were going through this morning, Director McCray was talking about, Fugate that was here in Florida, who has now moved on to FEMA. One of their big things was, during the first 72 hours again, our whole job from an emergency management standpoint is we're going to show up, we're going to rescue, we're going to do search, we're going to do the basics for the first 72 hours. What we're not here to do is to bring you food and water and kick your feet up and make you comfy, okay? So their whole principle was, get a plan, your big boys and girls, go out and make sure your families are prepared, make sure your businesses are prepared, because when we show up, we're not there to give you the basic comforts. We're there to do very serious stuff, the search and rescue, and help the elderly and the people that can't help themselves, okay? So you need to make sure that your employees are prepared and also educated. Now, I wanted to put in just one slide on pandemic planning. Again, this is not a hot topic. It's not, you're not seeing this all over the news channels right now. But again, these are things that kind of come in wavelengths, okay? Right now we're kind of in a trough where it's a quiet zone. But everything, if you follow the CDC, which we do, and kind of the World Health Organization, WHO, they're talking about, this stuff will creep back in. It will become a reality again at some point. And whenever these things creep back up, no matter how bad you thought the last one was, it's always worse the next go around. These things get stronger, okay? It's focused on personnel-related issues. So what I would tell you is that from a pandemic standpoint, what you need to do is just educate yourself, number one, on what the pandemic is. Find out what the facts are, coordinate with local health officials, follow the lead of what they're saying. The biggie, though, is you need to review and revise your human resource policy, all right? What we mean by this is, if I work at the company and my son or daughter gets sick, okay, or comes down with something, and I miss 2 weeks of work, are you going to fire me? You need to think about, what kind of flexibility you're going to put in. If I come down with it, or if my wife comes down with it, or whatever it is, there's certain issues that start to pop up about what are the thresholds about, employee retention, and what are you going to give, and what are you going to get. So think about your human resource policies. You also want to, of course, educate your staff on healthy habits. They talk about don't cough in your hands, cough in your sleeve. Putting basic things like the towel wastebasket in the bathroom right by the door so they can open it, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of proactive measures. Enhance your cleaning level at all facilities, but then also review your technology capabilities. If it got severe enough and you had to work from home, is that a capability? Could you run your office space, or could you rely upon your employees to run some type of operations from home? Do you have technical capabilities for that? And then the realities. So as we transition, first off, developing your plan, first off, it's not rocket science. You guys know this. You do, all right? But the difference is you've got it up here. What you got to do is you've got to document it on paper. You got to get it out of your head and down into a tangible format where it can be shared across your enterprise, okay? whether you're a group of 10 employees or 1,000 employees, it doesn't matter. So you want to make sure you know this, all right? Now, if something were to happen, you want to make sure it's documented because you might not be around when the time comes. That doesn't mean you're dead, okay? You could be at this isn't all gloom and doom. You could be at a conference in Denver, all right? You could be on vacation, sipping, Mai Tai in Tahiti, whatever it is. But you're not around to share the knowledge you've got up here. We've got to get it down on paper. We've got to get it in the plan so it's a shared environment. Now, they also need to be developed by a team of people. Obviously, if one person in your organization built this plan from front to scratch, or front to back, let me tell you, you don't have a plan, okay? If one person builds it, that's not a plan, all right? So it's got to be built by a team of people. There has to be some oversight. There has to be participation. And then again, for larger organizations, if you're more complex, you really need to put together many BCPs for each moving part of the engine. All right? So if you put it together, if you are a large organization, there are certain key components that you need to make sure are involved from the get-go. IT, finance, purchasing. The reason we point these out is if they have a bad day, everybody's having a bad day. If you show up and your email's not working, every department's going to have a bad day. Okay? Finance and contracting and purchasing, there's certain centralized components that if they aren't operating at full speed, everybody's going to feel the pain. Now, BCPs, when you put these together, they are about disasters, but they're not just about disasters. Okay, and that's something we always have to knock people down a few notches because they get into this. Well, if something that big happens, we're not important. You got to take that out of the equation. Okay, it could be something big. It could be a weather event, a hurricane, a tornado. It could be a bomb threat. All right, it could be something as simple as black mold. All right, again, on the government side of the work, we see a lot of times these buildings, they were built in the 50s and 60s. They all of a sudden pop off the panel one day and find a huge thing of black mold behind it. What do? They got to close the facility. They got to move these people. They go through the same relocation issues that you would for a big disaster event. The facts are the same. We can't work here. We have to move. Where are we going to go? What are we going to need? Once we get all set up, what do we do first, second, and third? What's important? What's not? So they still go through the same issues. Plumbing issues, a pipe burst. Walking on a Monday morning, you got your $5 Starbucks, and you got 3 inches of water on the floor. Again, no sirens, nobody's dying, nobody's screaming. It's just the fact of the same thing. You got to move, you got to go somewhere, X, Y, and Z. Also think about, as sad as it is, employee sabotage. You give somebody a pink slip, next thing you know, as they walk out the door, they just wiped out your whole Z drive. All right? So you got to think about that, and also that's burglary. It's the weekend. You're enjoying the day on the boat. You come back in on Monday morning, and all your computers are gone. Your server's gone. All right. So again, just to kind of reiterate, business continuity planning is not just about disasters. They're definitely applicable, but there's a whole other host of stuff that can step in and cause you to think about, wow, we didn't see that one coming. Okay. And then also, it's not just about buildings and office spaces. Everything we've talked about so far is, you've got a building fire, you've got a hurricane that takes out your facility, but also it's personnel related. If they are out of the area because of a hurricane evacuation, obviously winter storms are not to worry about down here, but pandemic flu, all right? So when you start to think about if half the staff can't show up, how are we going to get the job done? And what things are we going to postpone? And then also IT issues. All right, so potential issues. Run through these real quick. So the catch-all, who's got the catch-all employee where you just kind of shove it? This great employee does everything. You just shove it to them and say, get it done. You can't do that, all right? It's got to be a shared responsibility for everything that we've talked about. Executive support. I always ask with every project before we get started, if they're willing, I hope they are, give us a letter that says, hey, you know what, this is important to us. As your president, your CEO, your director, whatever it is, put it in writing that says, hey, when Chad calls you or when we invite you to this, and this, participate. This is important. This is about protecting our operations. Letter of executive support or sign-off goes a long, long way, especially when you got bad apples that maybe don't want to play ball. Okay? Departmental participation. Again, see above. I'm not important, whatever it is. Whatever the reasons are, hey, the boss thinks it's important, show up. Okay? End of the world mentality. Try and cut this out. All right? It's not just the big stuff, but it's also we need to focus on small disruptions. Make sure that people understand it could be the little things that affect you. And then also, again, back to that I'm not important. Your department exists, therefore you are important. All right? I'm not going to be the one that tells the boss our department's not important. In this economy, no way. Okay? Don't step on that landmine. IT involvement, again, make sure they're in there, because this is a technical world we live in. They need to have oversight of all this. It swirls around all the IT requirements. And then, of course, standardization. Planning systems. Michelle, Mark, everybody talked about, we built a planning system 5-6 years ago. I equate it kind of like to TurboTax, all right? It's designed to walk you through A to Z of what goes into a business continuity plan, all right? So, where you work, what your functions are, this, and this. But what it does is it's designed to keep you focused on streamlining the planning process so that when you hit give me my plan or print it, we do all the document creation, all the heavy lifting. What that translates to you is you can focus on the strategy and the contents of your plan, not what I call the prettiness of the plan, okay? So there's a lot of different systems where whether you want to use something that we provide or if you want to look at other alternatives, by all means, standardize the process. Planning systems are very helpful so you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper, okay? So last couple of things, plan maintenance. Again, people talk about, wow, how are we going to keep this thing going? What we found that's successful is once you get your plan in place, break it into monthly increments. This doesn't have to be a huge hurdle or a huge burden. Once a month, sit down for 30 minutes with your people and say, hey, this month's topic, let's make sure our personnel and our contacts are updated. Next month, we'll do this. Next month, we'll look at vital records, so on and so forth. Take bite-sized pieces, all right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So once you put your plan together, put it into monthly increments. That's what we find is the best success. And then caution. It's easy to say, hey, this will never happen. It's not. We've been lucky. Hurricanes come and go, right? But it'll never happen. We've got a great building on a great street. It's a solid foundation. Don't make that assumption. All right. This is just going back a year. Some of the things that and think about this. Anytime you look at CNN or you go to the websites and the news, think about all the disasters that are happening everywhere, not just in the U.S., but all around the world. Nashville floods a year ago. You would ask anybody in Nashville if downtown would look like that. I used to live in Nashville. I can tell you, Nashville's up on a hill. That's crazy for me to see, 10 feet of water in downtown. That's some serious flooding. If you would ask anybody, they would have said there's no way that's going to happen, but it did. Obviously, the Japan earthquake. I'm sure everybody's heard about that one. The tsunamis, the nuclear. Tuscaloosa tornado, okay? Just a couple of months ago. This is not a country song. This is something that really happened. April, a huge amount of weather came out of April. Arizona, New Mexico, currently ongoing right now, disrupting all kinds of flight patterns. It's disrupting businesses all across the West right now. In April alone, just looking at the stats, 500 confirmed tornadoes. That's an amazing figure. All right, so again, caution. Don't assume it won't happen. All right, stuff happens. It happens every day. It will happen. So where do you start? First, don't look at the end of the process because I know it looks a long way away. Don't do that. It's intimidating. And the reality is there is no finish line. All right. When you start your plan, you have to update your plan. Things change. Okay. So don't look at the end of the process. Meet with the leadership. Explain the importance. All right. And when you meet with them, go back to those basic questions we talked about. If something were to happen, what do you think it would be? If we had to move, have we thought about where we would go or could go and what we would need? Have we thought about how we could pull all our staff together? Can we do it quickly, efficiently? All right. Once we get operational, what are the things we do first, second, and third, whether they're financial related, compliance related, whatever it is. And then finally, what do we need to do our functions? What systems, softwares, databases, tools, amenities that go into all this? So again, this is very basic. It's not rocket science. Basic principles. The last thing, printed plan in a shiny, colorful binder. You show up. You got your business continuity plan. Looks nice, looks great, goes on the shelf, but this is not the key, okay? The key is the planning process, all right? It's the process of involving your teams, involving the executive leadership, and making sure there's oversight, all right? It's the planning process. And then again, it's constant, ongoing, due to personnel changes and turnover, changes in the technology that you use, and also changes in your operations as an organization. With that, questions, comments. I threw you in the deep end of the pool. I apologize if anybody's around. So, any questions?
Yeah, one.
Yes.
And Chief McCrane could probably elaborate on this. Our challenge, we have our continuity of operations and continuity of government, which is the public sector version of the PC audit. There seems to be a stretch of convincing folks, okay,
government or if it's the private sector is talking about this before the event or educating them. I mean, now's when you want to talk about it. If we do have a pandemic event, you said it correctly, which is I may not be sick, but I may be too scared to come into work because I might get sick. The last thing I want to do is go to work, get sick, and then bring it back to my family. So you're going to have a lot of people that close their doors. They're going to stockpile at home. They're going to do what they do and forget everything else. You need to think about that from an organizational standpoint. So back on that slide where I was talking about your work at home technologies, I would say the very first thing, if you wanted to make it a priority from pandemic planning, is identify the staff that can work at home and set up the technical capabilities for them to do it now. Don't wait till it happens, because we heard a lot of that, a couple of years ago as the pandemic came up, people would say, well, if we have to shut our doors as a government agency, we're just going to work from home. And there's a lot of people in the background, Verizon, Comcast, all that were standing there saying, hey, if everybody starts working from home, I'll be the first to tell you our infrastructure won't uphold it. That the connectivity will not handle it. And the companies were actually saying, our bandwidth will not be able to do this at this level. Okay, so that won't work. The technology side was also finding that the internal IT people were saying, you think you can VPN, you think you can do this, but it's not reality. It sounds good in a meeting, it sounds good as a statement on paper, but if it's not tested or tried, it's not going to work. The one thing I would say is try it. If you have a responsible staff that you can send them home for a day and say, try and work from home, do it now. Don't wait till the event happens, because if they can't do it now, you're not going to be able to put pieces in places during a pandemic event to make it happen then. All right, that's where demand's going to go up and everything else, you're going to lose control of it. So if that is a concern, if you think that people working from home for your organization will be a solution to keep your business operating, go through the motions now while, again, it's calm, we don't have a pandemic, and if it does work, great, now you know, and if it doesn't, you've got next steps to move into. Okay? Courts, I keep using the courts, but that was a very similar discussion that they had. I mean, the courts were very concerned about this, because think about it. As a court system, their whole job is to send out jury summons. All right, so I sent all these jury summons out to you guys, and then what your job is to do is show up in a building, in a room with a bunch of strangers, participate in court proceedings. All right, that goes against everything that the CDC says to do about pandemics. Do not bring a large group of people, strangers, into one room and have them congregate and then send them out all on their own. So the courts are trying to figure out, well, if we have cases to pursue, if we have to hold court, how do we do that without juries? Because we can't pull together juries, because now it's a legality issue. If I show up for jury summons because the law says I have to, and then I get sick, can I sue the state of California because you forced me? I mean, there's a lot of things that they started to wrangle with about what can we make people do or not do under pandemic events. And so each of you have to face that individually for your operations. Okay? So, other questions? BCP as a whole? I've got cards as well. I'm glad to share the PowerPoint. If you want this, if you have other questions, additional things, let me know. Glad to spend as much time. And again, I'm local, Sarasota County, down in Venice, so very accessible.